In the quiet hollows of the Missouri Ozarks, 1888, a lone widow named Clara Wren kept her bakery lit long after the lamps of the town went out. Locals called it the Candlelight Bakery for the faint amber glow that seeped through its windows each night, long after midnight. Clara was a small, graceful woman in her late 30s, with hands hardened from kneading dough and a heart cracked by grief. Her husband, Samuel Wren, had vanished 2 winters prior, swallowed, they said, by the flooded White River during a storm. Since his death, Clara rarely spoke. She baked as though each loaf were a prayer, a plea for warmth in a cold world. Her bread, oddly enough, was said to have flavor like no other. Travelers passing through the Ozarks spoke of its aroma, of how even a single bite felt like coming home. But there was something else, something eerie. When the townsfolk passed by her bakery late at night, some swore they heard soft crying inside, others whispers. And one farmer's wife swore, "When she bakes, the oven moans like it's alive." Clara never denied it. She simply smiled sadly and said, "Every loaf holds a memory, Mrs. Crenshaw. Sometimes, memories don't rest easy." On a bitter January evening, as the wind howled through the bare trees, a knock came at Clara's door. She wasn't expecting anyone. Few dared visit after dark. When she opened it, a young man stood shivering on her porch. His coat was torn, and his eyes, a piercing gray, seemed lost, haunted even. "Ma'am," he said softly, "I'm looking for work, or at least something warm to eat. I can pay what little I have." Clara hesitated. No one had spoken kindly to her in months. The townsfolk pitied her, yes, but kept their distance, whispering tales that her bread was cursed. Yet something in the young man's eyes reminded her of Samuel, kind, worn, and full of unspoken sorrow. "Come in," she finally said. "The night's too cruel to turn a soul away." The young man introduced himself as Elias Boone, a traveling woodworker. As he sat near the fire, he glanced toward the baking loaves. The scent filled the room like music. Elias said softly, "Smells like someone still loved here." Clara's hands froze on the dough. No one had said something like that since her husband vanished. That night Clara decided to bake one more batch, an old recipe Samuel had once taught her. She called it the hearth bread, the kind meant for long winters. Elias watched quietly as she worked. Her movements were tender, like she was handling something sacred. But when the dough went into the oven, a low sound began to rise. Not the crackle of firewood, something else, something human. It was faint at first, a soft sigh. Then it grew into a long, muffled cry. Elias leapt to his feet. "Ma'am, what is that?" Clara didn't look up. Her eyes glistened, but her hands stayed steady. "It happens. Sometimes," she whispered. "When I bake with his recipe." Elias backed away, chilled. The oven seemed to breathe, the walls creaking as though the building itself mourned. And then, as suddenly as it began, the noise stopped. When Clara opened the oven, the loaves were perfect, golden, steaming, and beautiful. But Elias swore he saw faces in the crust, fleeting, vanishing, and heard a faint whisper in the air, "Clara." By morning the tale had spread. The widow Wren's bakery had come alive again, and with it, strange sounds in the night. The pastor, Reverend Halpern, called it blasphemy. He warned the townsfolk not to eat the bread of the dead, but others, hungry and poor, didn't care. One by one, they returned to buy Clara's loaves. They claimed the bread healed sorrow, that after eating it they dreamed of their loved ones, speaking to them one last time. A mother swore her dead child appeared in her sleep, smiling. A farmer said he saw his late father forgive him for old mistakes. Clara never confirmed anything. She only said, "Maybe grief just needs to be fed." But deep inside, she knew the truth. The oven had begun to whisper her husband's name again. Elias stayed on as her helper. He chopped wood, cleaned, and even repaired the bakery's broken sign. Over time, Clara began to trust him. One night after closing, he spoke softly. "Mrs. Wren, there's something I ought to tell you." He looked nervous, his hands trembling slightly. "2 winters ago, I was a hand on the ferry that crossed the White River. The night your husband drowned, I was there." Clara froze. Her heart pounded. You saw him?" Elias nodded slowly. "The storm came sudden. Your husband tried to save a boy who'd fallen in. The ferry broke. He went under before anyone could reach him." Tears filled Clara's eyes. She had always imagined Samuel's last moments. But hearing it from someone who saw it was a knife to the soul. Then Elias added quietly, "He saved my brother that night. My family's alive because of him. That's why I came here, to find you, to thank you." The widow turned away, her shoulders shaking, and in the silence that followed, the oven crackled softly. Like it, too, was crying. Clara began to notice something. Each time she baked after sunset, the oven grew warmer than fire alone could explain. And when she lit her candles, her late husband's handmade wicks, the flames flickered blue. One evening, she placed her hands over the dough and whispered, "Samuel, if you're still here, help me make it right." Elias, standing behind her, felt the air change, heavy, electric. The smell of the loaves shifted, turning sweet and smoky all at once. Then, faintly, a voice, carried by the hiss of the fire. "Clara, let me go." She gasped, tears streaming. The dough seemed to pulse beneath her fingers. Elias rushed forward to stop her, but Clara only whispered, "Not yet. There are still hungry hearts." And when the bread finished baking, it screamed again. But this time, the sound was softer, almost peaceful. Word of the screaming bread reached the town sheriff, Amos Ledger, a hard man who had no patience for superstition. He arrived at dawn with 2 deputies demanding entry. "Mrs. Wren," he said, "there's talk you're practicing witchcraft, that you're summoning spirits in your oven." Clara stood her ground. "Sheriff, I bake bread, not ghosts." Amos frowned. "Then you won't mind if we watch." She agreed. Before them, she mixed the dough slowly, her hands calm, though her heart thundered. As she slid the loaves into the oven, the men leaned close. At first, nothing happened. Then, a sound, faint, rising like a cry caught in wind. The deputies turned pale. Amos banged his fist on the counter. "Enough of this devilry." But Clara only said softly, "It isn't devilry, sir. It's love that never found rest." The sheriff stormed out, but before leaving he muttered, "That love of yours best stay silent, widow, or I'll see this place burned." Elias clenched his fists. "You can't let him stop you," he said. Clara smiled sadly. "He won't have to. I think the end's already near." Days later, the rain came, fierce and unending. The White River swelled again, threatening to wash away the lower part of town. People rushed for higher ground. Clara, remembering the storm that took Samuel, froze by her window as thunder rolled across the hills. But Elias ran inside, soaked, shouting, "The mill's collapsing! The children are trapped inside!" Without thinking, Clara grabbed a lantern and ran into the storm with him. They reached the mill, its beams groaning under the weight of water. Inside, 2 children cried out, stranded atop a broken loft. Clara climbed up, ignoring the wind tearing at her skirts. Just as she lifted the last child down, the floor gave way. Elias caught her arm, pulling her clear, but her lantern fell into the flood, extinguishing its flame. In that darkness, they heard it again, the scream. Not from the oven this time, from the wind itself. And Clara whispered, trembling, "Samuel?" When morning came, the town lay battered, but alive. The children were safe, and word spread that the widow had risked her life to save them. That night, as the rain quieted, Clara entered her bakery one last time. She lit her final candle, the last of Samuel's wicks. Elias stood by as she mixed her dough, but this time she added something new. A small wooden carving Samuel had made, a dove he'd once said would guide lost souls home. She buried it gently in the dough and whispered, "For all you saved, and all you couldn't." As the bread baked, the air filled with a strange light. The flame turned golden white. And when the sound came, the scream, it wasn't one of pain, it was release. A cry that rose and faded into silence, leaving the air warm and still. When the oven cooled, Clara opened it to find the loaf glowing faintly, a perfect imprint of a dove on its crust. By sunrise, the town gathered outside the Candlelight bakery. Clara stepped out, holding the loaf wrapped in linen. She placed it on the church steps and said simply, "This bread belongs to everyone he ever helped, and everyone still hurting." The people watched as she cut the loaf and shared it among them. One by one, those who tasted it wept quietly, not from fear, but from peace. Each claimed to feel something lift from their hearts. Clara looked to the sky, eyes wet. The clouds broke, sunlight streaming through. For the first time in 2 years, she felt warmth not from fire, but from forgiveness. Elias touched her shoulder. "He's gone, ma'am. But he's home now." Clara smiled faintly. "No, Elias, we're home now." That night, when the bakery's candles flickered out, the wind carried no screams, only the scent of fresh bread and the faintest whisper of love released. For the first time in years, the bakery slept. No candlelight glowed behind its windows. No scent of baking drifted through the streets. The people of Ash Hollow spoke in hushed tones, half relieved, half heartsick, that the widow had finally stopped her midnight rituals. Clara, however, sat alone inside. She couldn't bring herself to light another fire. The oven, once alive with warmth and sorrow, now stood cold, its bricks darkened by soot and time. Elias entered quietly, a loaf of bread in his hands, baked the old-fashioned way, without whispers or flames that changed color. "I thought we could share breakfast," he said gently. She looked at him, her eyes tired but kind. "Thank you, Elias, but I think I've baked my last loaf." He didn't argue. He simply sat across from her, the dawn light spilling across the wooden table. They ate in silence, and for the first time, Clara noticed the bread tasted ordinary, comforting, human. Outside, the morning birds sang, and for a fleeting moment, the world seemed healed. A week later, a letter arrived by horse courier addressed to Mrs. Clara Wren. The handwriting was shaky and unfamiliar. When she broke the seal, her breath caught. It was signed by Reverend Halpern, the very pastor who had once condemned her bakery. "Mrs. Wren, I write with a heavy heart. Last night, I dreamt of your husband. He stood by a river of light and said one thing. Tell her I forgive her for keeping me tethered. I don't pretend to understand what this means, but I woke in tears. Perhaps your bread carried more mercy than my sermons ever did." Halpern. Clara set the letter down, trembling. Her husband's words, "Forgive her for keeping me tethered," echoed like a hymn through her chest. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that her grief had become a chain, not just binding her, but binding him. That night, she lit one final candle. As the candle burned low, a soft tapping came at her window. When Clara turned, she saw no one, only the reflection of her own face in the glass. But behind it, for a heartbeat, She thought she saw Samuel. He looked just as he had before he vanished, hair windblown, eyes full of laughter. "Sam?" she whispered. The reflection smiled faintly, and though no words came from his lips, Clara heard them as clearly as if spoken beside her. "Thank you for remembering me. But love's not meant to live in fire." Her tears fell freely now. The candle's flame danced higher, golden, alive. And for the first time, the bakery felt not haunted but holy. Later that week, as Clara began to pack away her tools, Elias stood in the doorway, his hat in hand. "Mrs. Wren," he said softly, "there's one more truth you deserve to know." She looked up, curious but calm. "You said your brother lived because of Samuel," she said. "I've thought about that night often." Elias nodded. "He did. But what I didn't tell you is, that boy he saved wasn't my brother." He swallowed hard. "It was me. I was just too ashamed to say it." Clara's breath caught. "You?" Elias nodded, eyes wet. "He died pulling me from the water. I've lived with that every day since. I thought if I worked here, helped you somehow, maybe I'd make it right." Clara reached across the counter and took his trembling hand. "Then you already have. He'd be proud you lived to be kind." For the first time, Elias smiled, truly smiled, and something deep in both their hearts finally began to mend. Spring arrived gently over the Ozarks. Wildflowers bloomed near the old mill and laughter returned to Ash Hollow. Clara reopened her bakery, but with a new name, The Living Loaf. No more candles, no more midnight cries. Each morning, she baked with Elias's help, greeting townsfolk with warmth instead of whispers. The bread still had something special about it, but it wasn't supernatural. It was simply love made visible. One morning, she found a small wooden dove on her counter, the same one she'd buried in the dough months ago. Its wings were whole again, polished smooth. She looked toward the empty chair by the fire and smiled softly. "Thank you, Sam." Sheriff Amos Ledger returned to the bakery one bright afternoon, hat in hand. He looked older somehow, humbled. "Mrs. Wren," he said, clearing his throat, "I reckon I owe you an apology. The folks round here say your bread's been helping more than any doctor or preacher." Clara smiled politely. "You don't owe me anything, Sheriff. Just be kind to the broken when they bake." Amos blinked, then chuckled softly. "Fair enough. I'll try." He bought a loaf and left, but later that day, he was seen sitting by his late wife's grave, eating that bread in silence, tears streaking his cheeks. And from that day on, no one ever called her bakery cursed again. One summer evening, Clara found herself alone again after closing. She lit one last candle, not out of grief, but gratitude. As she watched the flame flicker, she thought of every loaf, every tear, every life touched by what had once been her sorrow. The oven, now cool, reflected the candlelight softly. And for just a breath of time she thought she saw Samuel's hand on the brick, steady and strong as if blessing the place. Elias appeared in the doorway. "You lighten it for him again?" She nodded. "No. For us. For everyone who's ever lost and still learned to love." Elias smiled. "Then I reckon that flame won't ever die." By the next autumn, the town of Ash Hollow began holding a festival in her honor. The Candlelight Festival, where every family brought their own loaf of bread, baked in memory of someone they'd lost. No one spoke of curses or screams anymore. They spoke of forgiveness, warmth, and second chances. Clara, now known as Mother Wren, would sit beneath the oak tree, handing out slices to laughing children. "Remember," she would say, "bread rises only when given time. So does the heart." Elias, now a respected carpenter, built a new sign for her shop, one that read, "The bread that once cried, now feeds the living." One night, Clara dreamed of the river again, calm, moonlit, and still. She stood by the bank, holding a lantern, the same one that had fallen into the flood years before. From across the water, Samuel appeared, not a ghost, but whole, smiling. "You set me free, Clara," he said. "Now it's time you live." She tried to reach for him, but the light around him grew brighter. "When you bake again," he said softly, "bake for joy, not sorrow." Then he was gone. But in her hands, she found the wooden dove once more, glowing faintly. When she awoke, tears wet her pillow, but her heart was light, unburdened, at last. Years later, travelers passing through the Ozarks still stopped by the Candlelight Bakery, now run by Elias and his wife, though the sign still bore Clara's name. Clara had grown older but gentler, her silver hair catching the morning light as she sat by the window. When asked about the old stories, about the bread that screamed, the haunted oven, the widow who spoke to the dead, she would only smile. "It wasn't the bread that screamed," she'd say softly. "It was my heart, and once I listened to it, it quieted." She'd tear off a piece of warm loaf and hand it over, adding, "Love doesn't die in fire. It bakes into something sweeter." And as travelers left, they'd swear that in the fading evening light, a single candle still flickered in the bakery window, not crying, not haunted, but shining steady and kind, a light for every soul still learning how to let go.